On Monday, the 17th of January 2022, the Houthis killed 3 people in an explosion at the Abu Dhabi International Airport. As a response, the Saudi Arabia-led coalition, which is fighting the Houthi group in Yemen, started carrying out airstrikes. One of the attacks hit a Houthi-managed prison, killing at least 80 people, including migrants, women, and children. This presentation will analyze different media sources related to this mentioned attack and international law issues such as the killing of civilians and international humanitarian law. Yemen's war began in September 2014 when the Houthis began a march south to seize the entire country. Saudi Arabia entered the war a year after, in March 2015. On the other side, Iran has been backing the Houthis. In regards of international law, no Yemen, Saudi Arabia, or neighboring countries have been part of the conflict are part of the ICC and or have ratified the Rome Statute, making almost impossible to prosecute the perpetrators of crimes. The first media source that's part of the analysis is a news article by Al Jazeera, a Qatari public media conglomerate created in 2006 to consolidate soft powers against Saudi Arabia. It is an online written news piece in the conflict section of the paper, and it was published a day after the airstrike. The second piece that will be analyzed is a news article by Voices of America, which is a state-owned international radio broadcaster of the US. While Houthi rebels do not pose a direct threat to the United States, their attacks threaten an important US partner, Saudi Arabia. However, Biden has announced an end of the support to the Saudi-led coalition. It is an online written piece in the Middle East section of the news, published on the day of the airstrike. And finally, the third piece analyzed is part of WION's news broadcast, an Indian multinational English language news channel. It is a news piece that runs as part of the news broadcast on the 22nd of January, a day after the airstrike. The medium of delivery of the story highly contributes to the generation of opinions. In this case, and from my perspective, written stories tell about the incident, whereas the video shows the incident. Although imaging helps and influences the framing, words still play a more important role, especially if they're written. Now the video will move on to analyze the different media framing of each news source. The Al Jazeera article uses the displacement of blame framing. The Saudi coalition is the main reason of the escalation of the conflict, as they carry out systematic attacks against civilians. On the other side, those attacks carried out by the Houthis are unprecedented. This downplays the seriousness and the scope of the Houthis' behavior, reinforced by missing information regarding Houthi attacks. Although it is a two-sided conflict, it only blames the Saudi coalition for committing war crimes against humanity, although this term doesn't really exist in international law. Voices of America then employs a justification framing. The recent airstrike is accepted as conducted by the Saudi-led coalition, specifying the scope of the attacks and how are they destroying civilian infrastructure. However, these attacks are part of an intense campaign justified by the missile attack carried out by the Houthis the week before. They mention the principle of proportionality in its military operations. The third news piece uses the denial framing. The news insists on that the Saudi coalition denies responsibility for the strikes. By negating the frame, it is strengthening it. Following the don't think of an elephant example, if you mention Saudi Arabia and airstrikes in the same sentence, what they're doing is strengthening the frame of Saudi Arabia as the perpetrator. Now, in order to understand how the issue is being framed by the different sources, we're going to highlight some of the elements and patterns observed. First of all, when comparing the headlines, Al Jazeera employs the word denounce compared to the word says or say by Voices of America. For me, denounce means condemnation, whereas say it's only informing. In terms of the structure of the paper, while Voices of America and WION state the reasons of the attack at the beginning, Al Jazeera leaves this until the very end of the article, stressing that the coalition systematically kills civilians and that the Houthi attacks are unprecedented. There is also a difference regarding how different groups of the conflicts are being portrayed. Although the three sources agree and refer to the coalition as the Saudi-led coalition, they differ when they refer to the Houthis, ranging from the Houthi government, Al Jazeera, to Iran-backed Houthis, Voices of America, and Houthis terrorists by WION. Voices of America and WION agree on that the conflict started in 2014 when the Houthis ousted the recognized government. However, Al Jazeera states that the conflict started a year later when Saudi Arabia intervened. Following this pattern, Al Jazeera does not cover some aspects of the news, such as the drone attack carried out by the Houthis that killed 3 people, nor they mention some war crimes committed by the Houthis as well. When analyzing stylistic clues, such as language choices, it's interesting to highlight how victims are portrayed by the different sources. For Al Jazeera, the attacks have killed people, while Voices of America, it killed detainees, and for WION, it only took innocent lives. All the 3 news sources interviewed the Houthi health minister and members of the United Nations. Al Jazeera and Voices of America also present the voices of aid agencies, while WION does not. It is not surprising, as the latter denies the attack. Now, moving on to the imaging, the photograph used by Al Jazeera stimulates an empathy framing. It highlights the obligation of the international community to intervene to prevent human rights violations. In contrast, the framing used by imaging used by Voices of America shows the risks of intervening, presenting and producing a strong counterframe. Finally, WION quickly shows the footage of the prison attacked by the coalition and spends most of the broadcast on footages that shows the Houthi attack and demonstrations, which make the viewer forget about the prison attack. In terms of international law, Al Jazeera's news article does not accurately reference international law. Citing the Houthi health minister, they state that the prison airstrike has been a war crime against humanity. However, this term does not exist. It can either be a war crime, Article 8 of the Rome Statute, or crimes against humanity, Article 7 Rome Statute. If Article 7 of Rome Statute is analyzed, it will be concluded that these attacks do not classify as crimes against humanity. When reporting the same international law issue, Al Jazeera only focuses on the crimes committed by the coalition. Then, Voices of America point out the crimes committed by both sides, Saudi coalition killing hundreds of civilians, and the Houthis using child soldiers, both considered war crimes. WION condemns the attacks of civilians as war crimes and describes the Houthi group as terrorists. And to conclude the international law section of the analysis, I will now mention 3 international law issues that are not part of the analysis or of the news that should be represented. First of all, the prosecution of crimes. Yemen is not a member state of the ICC and nor are the key coalition members, meaning that the crimes committed during the civil war will not be prosecuted. Secondly, it should explain the implication of 1. The intervention of other states in a civil war, and 2. The implications of the Houthi attack outside the Yemeni border. And finally, none of the sources really express how are these attacks impacting aid delivery. People should know the scope of the situation. As the last UN report states, there are 20.7 million people in need and 4 million displaced people. This media analysis showed how the way we say something often matters more than what we say. In order to efficiently process new information, individuals apply primary frameworks to interpret it. If only one framework is observed and used to interpret an issue, most of the time we will fail to understand the matter. Using this interpretation as an example, if only one of the articles was consulted to obtain information about the attacks, we could either think that the coalition carries out systematic attacks and that Houthis attacks are unprecedented. This is if we analyze the Al Jazeera article. If we just look at the Voices of America, we will understand that the coalition attacks are not important and they're justified because of the proportionality of the Houthi attack. And third, if we only look at the WION's broadcast, we will understand and portray the Houthis as a terrorist group and understand that Saudi Arabia has not conducted the attack. So finally, I would like to say that comparing different sources and different frames will have as a result a more informed and more aware individual.